incredible panel. I'm super excited. First guest, Paule. Welcome. 35 years executive, CEO, boards, company startups, Findex, Myco, which is one of my favourites, the fabulous biocheese, Botanical Water Tech, former founder and MD of Lemnos. Mary Delahunty, welcome.
Thank you.
Campaigner for Change. Finished late last year with Hester as Head of Impact Investment. It's been described by the media as the Great Resignation. And you've established your very own ESG fund, so an incredible 15 years plus of experience. Also on the board of a number of incredible organisations, 000 Emergency Services, hats off to our first responders. Previous chair of the Ministers' Women's Advisory Council, on the board of RecLink, previously mayor of Glen Ira, Martyn Campbell, welcome. So you are the Work, Health and Safety Regulator for SA, the Executive Director for Safe Work South Australia. You're also on the board of Safe Work Australia, the Chair of Heads of WorkSafe Authorities, but 30 years plus experience. Natalie O'Brien, lucky last. But congratulations, you've been recognised with an Order of Australia in 2019 for services to tourism and hospitality. 25 years plus, stellar career, CEO for Food and Wine Victoria, CEO of Parks Victoria, interim CEO for Ballarat around regional tourism. 4 incredible panellists. Topic today, how do we lead through uncertainty? And I think if ever there was a time of uncertainty, this is it in our global history. So question is, how do we actually build a listen up and a speak up culture that keeps people safe at work? And we've all had different and varying experiences, ranging from the grassroots, hospitality industry, where I think it's pretty normal to be yelled at and abused constantly.
Yes.
Mining industry, well, I'm sure we'll touch on that. Financial services and financial industry, and then moving into environmental sustainability and impact. So very big depth of experience, which is incredible. So you guys have all held and hold leadership positions. Now in this era of uncertainty, what do you actually think it is, and Martyn, you touched on this, what makes a great leader? And I'll give you a little bit of time to think. Yeah. And Mary, let's start with you, because I know you've just launched yourself out into advisor land and you've got some pretty strong views on what it means to be a great leader. But what do you think it takes to be a great leader?
I think authenticity and truthfulness is really important. Being a human is incredibly important, and I think we've all come through businesses where we've seen a rise of the executive training kind of modules, and then the immediate application of that into an organisation. I think there needs to be a breadth, for example, in between executive training modules and application into an organisation, and that is to find yourself in that. What is my truth in that? How do I help people be the best? We've also all seen leaders who are pretty good at doing the work. Leading is not doing the work. Leading is leading the people to do the work. When you sit, and you would see this all the time within the organisation, and then you sit on the board of an organisation, you have different roles and you are called for different leadership. I think experiences, but also qualities in those particular roles. One of them is strategic, it's guardrails. It's a little bit of, have you checked on this? It's a little bit of rigour, a little bit of governance, and a bit of path setting. The other in the organisation is much more visionary and a lot more, can we go this way? Can we all go together? And I think the modern leader shows vulnerability, authenticity in doing that, or they're done. They're certainly not going to be able to gather a group of followers from the next generation if they can't be that way.
Hold that thought on next generation. Terry?
Yeah, Jane, I mean, a lot of what Mary says obviously is true, and you could answer this question in a different, million different ways, but I guess I like to sort of dumb it down to behaviours. It's really around, non-negotiable behaviours. And I often say that leadership is a gift given to you by others. Anyone that says, I'm a leader, fails immediately at that point. So it's having those behaviours, doing the things that need to be done, being true to your word, you mentioned the word authenticity, so that others will follow you. They don't need to like you. Often I think leadership gets confused with charisma, and in fact some of the best leaders are totally off the radar. They just get about doing what they need to do and get the most out of the group of people that they're leading. And the essence, the bottom line to it is respect. You don't need to be liked, but you need to be respected, and you need to follow through with your non-negotiable behaviours. And that really creates a leader, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, authenticity, respect, non-negotiable behaviours. Natalie?
Yeah, if I was just to put it down to a word, because obviously there are a lot of baseline qualities that you look for in a leader, but I think looking back, and sometimes you learn so much on the job, is being brave. And if you've got a collective decision, or you can see things in your culture that are not acceptable or not right, or you can see that the direction that you're heading is really being brave, because your community, your staff are going to look for you to sort of lead them in the right way and turn the organisation around and make it a good place to be. So brave, I think.
Brave. I like brave. And just picking up on, big corporate's very, very different to small business.
Yeah.
Different leadership skills required in...
I've thought about this because I've worked in large organisations and led very small organisations, and I think one of the things that I sort of take out of it is that small organisations are very quick to change culture, faster than a bigger culture, but they're equally fast in a culture going down as well. So I kind of think leading those organisations requires similar skills, but I think in smaller organisations and non-for-profit organisations, the culture can change much faster, I think. Yeah.
Nice. Martyn, you are a regulator. Your job is to determine poor behaviour, bad behaviour, catastrophic behaviour. You would have seen every leader from the most wonderful right through to the most terrible. What do you think is the quality of a great leader?
I would agree with everything that's been said. And for me, on the journey through Safe Work of the last 5 years and the reform programme that we've had, the standout for me is trust. So vulnerability, authenticity, being kind, being empathetic, and being able to adapt and change each one of those depending on the circumstances is critical. But when I reflected on what it meant for Safe Work through our reform programme, it was about, the keystone for me was trust. And if you have trust between people and between functions, between teams, and as an organisation with the community, then you can actually leverage a lot of the other capabilities quite easily or easier. So we've embarked on a huge programme to build trust with ourselves, between teams, between functions within the business, so that we can start pulling together. And I think for me, trust is really about competence and capability. So being able to do your job, and then people seeing that you can do your job well.
Okay, nice, good. So very visionary, but also practical from what I'm hearing. Okay, winning at all costs. So recent media, and you may not have seen this because it's very much a Melbourne thing, but just in the news, hot off the press regarding Melbourne Footy Club. They've had the first grand final for many, many, many years, and yet this week the coach has been accused of bullying and harassment. The board knew about it, the club doctor resigned, it's all over the paper. But first up question, how common is it? This is not an elite sports issue, you're all nodding. It's across industries. How hard is it to deal with? And I think you've talked about the difference between being a board member versus being an executive and who has responsibility for it. And what role should the board actually play in stamping it out? So I'm going to start with you, Martyn, even though I've just asked you a question, but you are a regulator your responsibility is safe work environments, and we're talking about listen up, speak up culture. But it's tough, and I suppose the question is, well, what do you actually think about these comments, questions?
But, I've been a real champion in my time in this chair on psychological safety, and that includes workplace bullying. So I think people won't ordinarily see bullying in the workplace if they're not looking for it, and if they don't know what it is, they'll walk past it. So for me, a starting point is everyone in the organisation has a clear understanding of what workplace bullying is and what it entails, and then as an organisation having some processes around articulating that training the staff, making it aware. And then for executives, and it's the CEO and the executive board to start walking the talk and enforcing it. So from an employee perspective, one of the worst things you can do is have something that identifies, such as bullying. We're not going to bully people in this business, but then senior executives doing that or not addressing it when it is done. So that completely deflates employees and workers and begs the question, why have we got the process in the first place? So from a regulator's perspective, we see that whole continuum of people who have fantastic procedures, training, executives walking the talk, where people feel psychologically safe to call out that behaviour immediately, to people who are bullied on a daily basis, but people either don't know that they're bullying or are just ambivalent to it in any event. So for us as regulators, we're starting to see an increase in bullying complaints coming through, and some of those are genuine and some of them aren't. And the ones that aren't is that people's perception is wrong. It's just they're not being bullied, they're being managed or performance managed. But again, it comes back to the law says you have to manage the risk. So as a business, you have a duty to manage the work health and safety risks of that business. And bullying is a safety risk, it injures people. So it is just as bad, if not worse, than somebody who chops the finger off. And we're generally quite good at dealing with those things, because we can see them, but not necessarily so good at the psychological injury side of it.
If the board is aware of those particular risks, and it feels in many cases that they are and have been made aware of it, then it lands at their feet to protect the workers who walk into their organisations or who trust them with their lives every day. And it's not good enough to sort of suggest that, well, eventually, we paid this person out, and you'll find NDAs, and secret deals going on everywhere. That's the true culture, no matter what's painted on the walls about respect and teamwork, etc. So when it hits the fan like that, that's what you see.
But I think if you sort of, again, simplify the whole thing, it's about dynamics, what I like to call dynamics and mechanics. Mechanics are sort of how you implement, how you monitor, how you report, how you structure up whatever needs to be done. And the dynamics really start sort of top down in terms of culture, in terms of stakeholders, all of the bits you mentioned, regulators and all of the varying party schools, etc. So and we need to give it enough time to truly to enact change. These things don't happen, but I'm encouraged that if you look at Gen Z and millennials, Gen Z in particular, I happen to spend a fair bit of time through sporting clubs and other things with these kids, and I'm really encouraged that the stuff that I hear, I'm thinking, these kids are a lot smarter than I was at that age. It's remarkable. So obviously our schools are talking about it, and we've just got to allow that passage for that change to happen sort of top down, and it is cultural, and then we do need to put all the things in place to facilitate it.
Back to your point about cutting someone's finger off, we wouldn't say, we'll just give it some time and we'll just let the generations, we're very, very light on this bullying as a workplace safety issue. And it is not only a safety issue, it is a financial risk for the business. If people were cutting their fingers off, generation after generation, we'd start to think, well, maybe we should do something more about it. And I think perhaps we could take a sharper edge to this. And the more we think of it as a mindset, a generational mindset, the more we let people off the hook who are poorly behaved in workplaces and ought to do better.
How hard is it to actually speak up? Is it a gendered issue? Now I'm going to hand to you, Mary, because you've been a mayor.
It is a gendered issue, and it is difficult to speak up. It's a gendered issue because power is a gendered issue. And power is at the heart of why people may feel that they are not supported to speak up. And if we look at some of the examples that are either in the media today or over the last couple of years, even when people have spoken up, the avenues for them to seek redress are not good enough to enact system change. So if we go through some of the financial services examples, which especially the listed ones where my interest then from a super fund point of view was as an owner. on behalf of, health and community services workers as it was. So, you want that engagement with the company. How are you doing this? How are you promoting this culture? And things will be written in policies, and things could be painted on walls, and things might be said on training days. But if the board knows about something and they either address it by paying someone out and seeking an NDA, or they don't address it, then actually you don't have a speak up culture. You've got a power dynamic going on that is unhealthy and presents a risk. And it's most often gendered because the people in power are most often men. And the people who are the victims of workplace either misbehaviour or bullying or something more serious are most often women. So it is most definitely gendered, and I don't think we should walk away from that at all.
I mean, it's definitely, a gender issue, but I also think it's age and other diversity issues as well, and where you are in the hierarchy of the organisation. And I think, when I look at boards, and when I jumped on my first board, I was, a minority being a female, but there were no younger people than me, and I don't cast myself as a young person anymore. I wish I could. But again, that opportunity for young people to be able to speak up and say things. So I think it's definitely the gender, but even more broader than that as well. We need to open up the channels so young people can speak.
Yeah, thank you. And before we go to you, Martyn, because I actually asked myself this question as I was putting together the question. So is it a gendered issue? Is it age and experience? Is it LGBTIQ? Is it neurodiverse? Is it Indigenous? Is it non-English speaking backgrounds? I mean, it feels like it's any differential where there is a difference between power. And so while I'd like to say, yeah, it's gendered, and I think in many cases it is, there are examples where it's not just about gender, it's about difference of people and acceptance of diversity. And we will get to that topic, but what, in your view, is happening?
I agree with those sentiments. It is gendered. It is that power imbalance, and I think we're probably at the start of a wave of disclosure. So the last 10 years has seen some change, but I think the last couple of years in particular has seen some rapid change, and I think that change is going to accelerate over the next 5 years. And it's with people who've got courage, who, like Brittany Higgins and others, who've made those disclosures, actually ventilate the subject, and people say, that happened to me. And people who've had those behaviours occur to them might not ordinarily think it's a work health and safety issue, but it's only through ventilation and discussion publicly that they will then realise that I'm in that boat. So I think, and I'm planning for my agency, and I'm pushing it with the other regulators, that we fully expect to see a wave of complaints come through in the next 5 years. And that presents some challenges for regulators, because we're really good at dealing with people who've had their fingers chopped off, but not necessarily dealing with somebody who's psychologically injured because they've been raped in the workplace. So Safe Work SA, we prosecuted an organisation last year where a worker was raped, and that was the first one. We've prosecuted people who've been set on fire in bullying situations, another first. But we're not psychologists, we're not psychiatrists, and we're not doctors. We're sort of safety generalists. So it presents a very different investigation. And I think regulators sort of need to engage in the early discussion with stakeholders, because if we can't regulate and hold people accountable for that sort of wrongdoing, then you've got to question whether or not the regulator's actually functioning.
8 days ago, Rio Tinto, global mining giant, released their report on workplace culture. I'm sure you have all seen it. It's shocking, but not unsurprising. I grew up in country South Australia, a mining town. 50% of people report bullying. Racism was common. There are actually 21 complaints of actual or attempted rape over the 5 years. 26 recommendations have been made by Elizabeth Broderick, the former Australian Sex Discrimination Commissioner. So what are your thoughts on that? What do you think as an organisation? They've put their hand up and said, we own it. What do they need to do? Not just Rio Tinto, every organisation across every industry. What do you think they need to do?
There's something, firstly, to be said about the transparency of the report and the release of the report. And I think more companies should do that, and that is to be slightly nodded at. I wouldn't say applauded, I wouldn't say congratulated, but we accept that that is a step in the right direction, because the response from Rio Tinto in Juukan Gorge incident was not to be transparent, was in fact to tell staff that just wait, this will blow over, etc., etc. which is abhorrent. But the findings within that report, just like you said, Jane, they're not terribly shocking. To see it written down is shocking, but not surprising. And so how, as a CEO running a company, are you surprised by that? And if it's systemic, where is the risk committee on the board? Now, I know the Rio Tinto structure fairly well, having engaged with them heavily over the last year and a half on behalf of an asset owner. Their risk committee is actually made up of the entirety of the board. The risks that are apparent in that report and in the way in which we saw the incidents around the Pilbara play out are almost the same thing, as in there's a lack of integrity between the saying and the doing. That is the risk. And risk committees should turn their attention to that and value it. And it isn't related to the immediate share price. Iron ore, the commodity, is related to the immediate share price. Those risks are related to the long-term value of the company and potential compensation. And that's what risk committees should be doing. And that's very unsexy to talk about how you then minute that. But it has to start with that genuine feeling that this is going to come after our company, in the hardest possible way. And also the human feeling that there are people who come to work and cannot feel safe under your stewardship. And that's heavy. So walk from there.
Thank you. Martyn, to you. The thing that I found most interesting, having watched risk committees, it doesn't make any sense that they hadn't been utilising data. Can you comment on that? Not just from a Rio Tinto perspective, but across the board. How is it possible that a company does not understand how safe or unsafe their work environment is?
So I think going back to what we were talking about before about executives walking the talk, walking the floor and asking the right questions, it beggars belief that a chief executive would say, I didn't realise that was systemic. So you've only got to look back in the last couple of years and look at federal parliaments, state parliaments, a number of other organisations to see that these sorts of issues happen everywhere. So why would you expect Rio to be any different than anyone else? So for an executive team and a risk committee not to be asking those questions is worrying. And even if they are asking the questions, questioning the evidence that's presented to mitigate that. And one of the best ways I've found for executives to really get clarity is actually go and walk the floor and talk to people, and start to build trust. Because when you build trust, people will talk to you and they'll open up. And every morning I walk into my agency, I grab a cup of coffee and I'll go and walk the floor and I'll sit with people and talk to them. And over 5 years, what they tell me is incredible. And what you find is quite often that information is filtered out mid-organisational structure. So I'm not blaming CEOs or boards, because information may well be getting filtered out mid-management level. But that's another issue in itself. But if you're not asking the questions of the people, you're not going to know that. So I expect a lot of other mining companies and manufacturing companies and defence systems to have the same. It's not surprising for me that report the way it is. I don't think the CEO had any other choice but to accept in the entirety. What I'd be really keen to look at is what sustainable solutions they're going to implement to fix the root cause.
So you are a board director. You're a chairman. You've been a CEO. You still are a CEO. You've got startups. You're dealing with 100 different things. As the CEO, what would you have come out and said?
Well, I guess you're to a degree stage managing a whole thing. That you've got shareholders that are wanting to hear bits, employees, all the stakeholders as we've talked about. But at a personal level, I'd be totally devastated. I'd be looking at points of resignation, at making a statement, not for my job, but to the industry, to the people that are to follow, to say, this is bullshit. I mean, we can't get away with this. I mean, did he fall over and hit his head and wake up a few years later? I mean, what's he been doing? Who the hell is this guy? I mean, I don't know the intimate details of it, but from the way it's been described, it's very, very poor. I would be expecting resignation. I would be expecting accountability. I would be expecting change. And they're milestone moments. They're moments that you can reflect back on your life and say, well, look, I fell on my sword. I maybe should have or shouldn't have, but I've made a statement there. There's a line in the sand, and hopefully if enough people do that, we may get some change.
And I think that's a nice segue across to you about brave CEOs, brave chair, brave board, owning it and acting on it.
Absolutely, and I also think that there's something in the selection process and the performance criteria. If you're appointing an executive, you want an executive that is walking the walk and looking at the data. And if the data isn't set up, what's the benchmark? I mean, I think, with whether it's health and wellbeing, if you haven't got a benchmark, you don't know whether you're really doing well on it. So I think there's a real accountability thing, is make sure that the executive and the board know that this is part of your charter. This is what you need to do if for whatever reason they aren't mature enough to have those sort of skills.
I think it's a breath of fresh air if people get involved and have to go and do the extra bit, even to their own detriment. But I think that's newsworthy. We need to see more of that genuine accountability all the way through to the board. We don't see enough of that, particularly for these big issues. These are huge issues. I mean, that was like a rap sheet you read there. 25 rapes or whatever it was. I mean, imagine one, let alone 25, and they're the ones that they found. There's probably 250 there, It's terrible. It's terrible.
And you mentioned sort of statistics. I mean, from a workers' compensation perspective, and when you sort of get down to the bottom line on dollars, it's cheaper to cut someone's finger off than it is to psychologically injure them. So there are fewer psychological claims at the moment, but I think that's because it's early days for that cohort of injuries, but it's increasing. But the actual dollar value is anywhere from 3 to 5 times more than a physical injury. And it takes 3 times longer to get a worker back to work from a psychological injury than it does a physical injury, if they ever go back at all. So I think that's going to impact workers' comp levies, and that'll get the attention of CFOs and boards. But it would also be good if you had workers pushing it up as well as the executive pushing it down, and shareholders really questioning boards and executives to say, do we really want to invest in somebody that lets the staff be raped?
Yeah.
Do we really want to invest in people who bully our workers, and because we've paid several million in workers' comp fees that we shouldn't have? And I think that's the sort of thing that'll get the attention of those at the top.
3 hot topics on the minds of every exec. ESG, your favourite, diversity and inclusion, and increasingly workplace wellbeing. This intersection between people and planet. In my mind, if you've got an unsafe work environment, which is a company that doesn't keep its employees safe, you're wasting your time on ESG, diversity, inclusion, or workplace wellbeing. So let's kick off with you, Mary.
I think they're all the same thing. And so if I had a time machine, I would go back. I'd stop at that Johnny Diesel concert where I wore the white bodysuit, because that was an error. But then go back, I think, a bit further and... Oh, thank you. He didn't, and that's who I was going for. And I would go back to where we put those 3 letters together, E, S and G, and try and keep them separate, because they were to describe various risks that businesses should be aware of. And the other concepts that you've mentioned there, Jane, they come under G. And so for environmental risks, social risks and governance risks are risks to society, and businesses need to be aware of them, and they also encompass diversity and inclusion. They encompass workplace wellbeing, workplace health and safety. And what we've done by calling it ESG is get really good at the bit that we've got data for, which is the environment. Yep. So we're not good at implementing anything about it, but we can really count it these days. But I've got a strong focus on that S element, because I think that's really underdone, but it actually circles a lot of the things we've been discussing today. What does it mean to be a part of a society? And what does that mean in terms of your sphere of influence and your obligation to that society? And so it should be a hot topic for execs, I think, and what they need to be able to do is take a stakeholder view, as in you're not serving just the shareholders, you're serving your employees because they put their trust in you. You're serving their customers because your brand is an extension of their values. And you are serving the shareholders because they've put some trust in the value of the company. And so how you find your place in the world and your purpose as an organisation, that's really what it circles down to. Easy, right? Simple. Simple. Easy.
That is a brilliant answer. I'm going to go next. I don't know if you're next.
Well, why not?
Because I was thinking the same thing as you read those three things. I thought ESG is actually all of those things. It's exactly the way you defined it. Talking about stakeholders is exactly the way I personally talk about it. I mean, this concept of, and not everyone agrees with it, but sustainable capitalism, I mean, which most people say, oh, that's a nonsense, it's a theory. But if you sort of think about it, where you move from shareholder, a mentality around shareholders, to stakeholders, so you change the narrative and you start to include your customers and your employees and your investors and all of the God's living children in there, and your decision-making changes. And if you look at ESG, it's morphed into sustainability, which I don't mind, because you can't keep saying ESG and trying to carve it all out. So if the world likes to hear it as sustainability, we'll go with that, because there's a chance they'll embrace it. But it's more than just the environment. And even the guys that counted in the environment, half of it is greenwashing anyway. So we need to get better at that little bit. But it is the social, it is the corporate governance, it is the diversity, it is the discrimination, it is H&S, it is. So those that embrace it will prosper, and those that are in denial will perish.
And from the big end of town, I would love to see, and I've said this to every CEO I've come across, is to try and get work health and safety and psychosocial risks on board agendas right at the top, so that people start talking about what they're doing to keep their people safe. And I always say to them, if your company has a terrible incident rate, would you want your child working on the front line?
See, it's interesting in our Findex business, which I co-founded and chair, that some years ago we moved risk management, as we call it, in our board papers, to the first agenda item. We actually start there, looking at a whole bunch of stuff. And we had a board meeting last week, coincidentally, and I've sort of been trying to get the ESG component up and running, which has now happened, and there's a whole, we were talking about it earlier. And I want to embed that into that report right at the front. First cab off the rank. That's what the board do a temperature check on how is the business performing, because it affects the overall culture. I mean, the rest filters down to details and the numbers and all the other bits. But I see that as a responsibility of all boards to try to structure up their agenda that way.
And subliminally, that sends a huge message when people look at your board agendas or even meeting agendas, and people and environment is right at the top and finance is at the bottom. And it not necessarily...
You've been sneaking a look at our board papers, haven't you?
But people automatically prioritise. Yeah. Well, they could be equally important, but from a visual perspective.
So powerful, isn't it?
It's powerful.